There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
And folks, that is indeed the actual sound of a double-stacked Marshall. On 11, of course, as they would say in Spinal Tap. Folks, don't go anywhere tonight. Are we going to have some fun? We've got a round table tonight with two UFO experts from Canada. Errol Bruce Knapp is with us, and one of my favorite guys in the whole world, Michel Deschamps. Fans of this show will know Michel for sure. So get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. Kick back, folks, for the next 2 hours. Brent Holland, host of Night Fright, and our two great guests are going to take you on a wonderful ride. We're going to go up and down and all around and back and forth again. Let me read this about our two guests tonight. Errol Bruce Knapp is joining us for this round table. He's from Peterborough, Ontario. That's where he's retired and he's living now. He's been a UFO researcher, well, pretty much most of all of his life. And by the way, he's only 19 now, folks, so pretty much 18 years, isn't that right, Errol? He has collected and archived a vast treasure trove full of UFO-related materials over the years. Now, you ready for this? You remember the movie a few years ago came out with Philip Seymour Hoffman, Pirate Radio? Well, Errol Bruce Knapp was part of that. He was an actual DJ on the ship. He was also a real DJ disc jockey, part of the famed crew that was broadcasting alternative radio just off the shores of the UK in the 60s. The story, of course, was later turned into the blockbuster movie Pirate Radio, which starred Philip Seymour Hoffman, the late great Seymour Hoffman. Our other guest tonight is joining us all the way from Sudbury, Ontario in Northern Ontario. Fans will know this name, the one, the only. Let me give a little drum roll here. Michel Deschamps is joining us. He is one of the most knowledgeable researchers on UFOs in Canada. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Brent, and happy podcast day.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Vous êtes très gentil, guys. By the way, just to let you in on a little behind-the-scenes scenario, TFO, which is Télévision Française Ontario, French Television Ontario, is doing a little vignette on Michel Deschamps. They are filming him right now. And Michel even shaved and he changed his socks for the show tonight. So everybody must be grateful for this.
And a fresh T-shirt.
So that's absolutely fabulous. Congratulations, Michel. Way to go.
Thanks.
Let's start off with you then, Michel. I want to talk about the rash of recent sightings in Ontario. There's the one that just happened down in Toronto. That was the big one. What's the most recent one that you've become aware of, Michel?
There's this couple that I know. Well, I know him. He's the father of one of our assistant managers at Walmart, who herself has moved to the other store. She went to the South End store, but I ran into her at a Timmy's late one night after heading home from work.
I should just stop you there and explain. Michel's talking about the south end of Sudbury, Ontario.
Yeah, sorry.
And Timmy's, that's okay. Timmy's, folks, for those of you that are south of the border, well, that's our landmark coffee shop. As a matter of fact, we were just in the news with Tim Hortons because they're buying out is it Burger King?
Yeah, Burger King.
Yeah, it's Burger King. And there was a hoopla about that. So most Canadians just call Tim Hortons Timmy's.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry to interrupt you, Michel.
That's okay. But anyway, so we ran into her at the Tim Hortons, and she came over And of course, I knew her from work. And she says that her mom and dad actually had a sighting in Hanmer. And she proceeded to say, well, orange whitish lights or whatever, or reddish orange lights. And I thought, well, okay, Chinese lanterns again. But anyway, she couldn't give me any more details than that. So I've been trying, and I'm still trying to coincide. Since I work afternoons, it's really hard for me to actually get a handle on some of the people that I want to interview for their reports. I could only call there like after 6, but I did talk to her dad and her mom, and it turns out that there were several flights of V formation lights, and orange reddish in color, which of course can't be Chinese lanterns because they don't hold formations. And they also said, well, he said to me at work, because he's a rep at our Walmart too, her dad, and he quickly told me the story, and what his daughter had told me compared to what he told me were way different. Because he said what he saw, I says, they thought they had cameras in hand, and they put the camera away when they thought the show was over. But then he came back out and he saw several V formations come over, and he says that the what you would call the wingtip lights all of a sudden took off in opposite directions, leaving the V formations to continue on. And I says, okay, that's not Chinese lanterns. So because we've been having a lot of oranges or orange reddish lights, not necessarily in formation, but sometimes in a string, one behind the other, behind the other, behind the other, moving in formation. Not just here, but I've heard reports from Southern Ontario. I know that the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle has been collecting over 3,000 reports since 2011, I think. So they're being seen all over, but this sounded so exciting that I'm still trying to get a hold of the couple so I can get the actual story on tape and then make an MP3 of it, put it on the website, add it to the list of numerous sightings that I've gotten.
Okay, Errol, Bruce Knapp, when you get a reporting like this, because you've got this huge archive, of course, what's the first thing that runs through your mind?
What the heck is that? Yeah, no, my UFO updates list was mothballed at the end of December last year, my having done 16 years of putting that archive, the email list, putting stuff out every day. And when you said I'm retired in Peterborough, I'm trying to be retired. I don't get those kinds of reports anymore. The archive is online, but it's locked down. There are over, I think, 90,000 posts in that archive that I put together over the last 16 years. I set up a UFO updates page on Facebook, and consequently, there's some stuff goes there. I don't see as many reports as I used to see, but it seems to me that a lot of them that we've been seeing around Ontario, and supposedly there's an increase in numbers of sightings, I think that is commensurate with the number of people who go out and buy Chinese lanterns. And it occurred to me as Michel was talking about the Hanmer sightings that it could be possible to string several Chinese lanterns together so that they fly in a formation. Seems to me. Wouldn't you think, Michel?
Yeah, they would probably still, even, it would have to be a rigid kind of framework, because then otherwise the Chinese lanterns would probably move independently of each other, even though they're tied to each other, I think.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up about it now.
I just want to tell folks who we're speaking with. Folks, we're speaking with Errol Bruce Knapp and Michel Deschamps. Errol Bruce Knapp is in Peterborough, Ontario, which is southern Ontario. It's a stone's throw east of Toronto, and it's about 100K from where I am in Kingston, Ontario. Michel is quite a bit further. He's way up north in a place called Sudbury, Ontario, where I used to herald from for a little while. That's where I met Michel. He's known as Mr. UFO Man, actually, in Sudbury. And there's a great television station that is doing a little vignette on Michel tonight, Télévision Française Ontario, and that is French television in Ontario. So we're going to continue with that. Now, I just want to explain to Hamner is a subsidiary, a little small portion of Sudbury. So again, that's Northern Ontario. Now, we've beat around the bush here with the orange lanterns and stuff. What happened in Toronto a few weeks ago? Michel?
I think those were. It looked to me at first I wasn't sure what to think. I thought they were like sort of like Phoenix lights, but more at an angle, like a 45-degree angle. But then when I grabbed the YouTube clip and made it into an MP4, and I got to take a closer look at it, and I noticed light number 5 and light number 6 among the string of it. So I think they're LED lights or Christmas lights that are strung from one building, 45-degree angled to the ground somehow. So I was kind of, once I saw that, I says, well, yeah, that's no wonder, because to me at first I didn't see the 5th and the 6th light. As I was going down from one light to another, following the string, and then you can make them out in front of the buildings. Because I thought initially they were a set of lights that were seen on the outskirts of town, way past the buildings. But when I saw light number 5 and light number 6, I said, okay, it's a string of lights for whatever reason, dangling from one apartment in a straight line, 45-degree angle. So it's like, okay, that kind of sucks. But the one object above the building, though, that one I can't explain because the camera pans down towards those ones and then pans up above the cornice of the rooftop of this other high structure, and you see a light in the sky there. But,
so it can be explained away from your perspective. Okay. Do you have any insights at all on that, Errol?
No, not at all.
Okay. That's okay. That's fine.
I actually do recall having looked at that and thinking the same thing. It looked like LED lights to me, too.
Yeah.
You get all kind, people with the proliferation of smartphones now with video and still high def capabilities. A lot more people are getting a lot more shots than, say, 5 or 6 years ago of things in the sky, and the civilian reaction to seeing something in the sky is usually, to immediately fly to, oh yeah, it's a UFO. Well, yeah, it's a UFO. It's an unidentified flying object because you don't recognize what it is. And the supposition now, everybody's conditioned to seeing something in the sky they can't explain, and it's an unidentified flying object. UFO has become synonymous with aliens, and it's a general description now, UFO. But people who see these things, as I said, and don't know what they are, will immediately say, "Oh, it's a flying saucer," or it's a UFO.
Errol, it sounds like your viewpoint, if you will, has changed in the past 16 years. Has it?
No, not really. I've had experiences that I haven't been able to explain in the past.
Can you tell us more?
My cousin and my cousin is from Australia. Mm-hmm. He'd been to a scientific conference in London. He, like Stan Friedman, is a nuclear physicist. And I'd come in from out of town on a gig to Peterborough, spent some time with the folks, and then I took my cousin, my little VW Wabbit convertible, to take him to Pearson airport outside Toronto. And we were headed down 11535, and it was a kind of gray day, and he and I are talking, and then there's a silence, and I take my eyes off the road and look at him, and he's leant forward looking out under the rim of the windshield at the top. So, and he's staring. So I lean forward a bit and look out, and there, up in the sky, going at the same speed that we were, is a gray disc. So eventually he says to me, "Well, what do you suppose that is?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you're the nuclear physicist, you tell me." And he said, "Well, I'm buggered if I know." So,
Great
anyway,
Australian accent, by the way, Errol.
thank you. I used to make a living with my voice, so my voice with a living. So we continue down 11535, headed toward the 401, and this thing keeps pace with us. And we were about 20 minutes from the 401. Eventually we make the turn onto the 401, and this thing still pacing us, and it's still on the left side. I mean, it was a flying disc. Absolutely no doubt in my mind about it. And as we get into the outskirts of Toronto, there's a electrical substation to the south side of the highway. And as we approach this thing, the disc takes off at an incredible speed straight ahead, gets right over the power substation, and does a hard right hand, not a turn, but just does a 90-degree up through the clouds, and it's gone.
How do you explain that? Any ideas?
No, it wasn't anything that I was, any flying machine that I was aware of, and certainly not the way it disappeared.
Folks, the 401, by the way, folks, is the busiest highway in North America. It gets 500,000 vehicles every day going between Toronto and Montreal, right along southern Ontario. It parallels basically the St. Lawrence River as you're driving west, and parallels Lake Ontario right into Toronto. Now, the reason why
you'd think with all those thousands of cars on the highway, somebody else would have seen it, but didn't hear anything, and I reported it to myself because I was with MUFON Ontario at the time.
And nobody else saw it.
No, well, not
nobody
that
else reported it.
Nobody else reported it, no. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Brent.
No, that's fine. That's no problem. Michel, you're up in northern Ontario. Do you find that you get a rash of sightings in a short period of time, and then maybe a dry spell where there's nothing?
Oh yeah, it's been like that. Not only in when it comes to sightings, but the same thing occurred when I was doing my my newspaper archive research. Some years were like filled with articles, and then some other years are just downright dead. Like, lucky if I got like 2 clippings for a particular month, for even a month or 3 months before I get something else. So, but in terms of sightings, yeah, it's God, I started skywatching again. I just got back from Blind River, and so I'm all set to go and spend a week at one of the hot spots there, not too far from where J. Allen Hynek used to have his camp. So
tell us about that, Michel.
Well, I've been there before. It's Lake de Borgne. It's 15 miles north of Blind River, Ontario. And of all the places that J. Allen Hynek would have picked to have a camp, is Lake de Borgne. And he actually named it, or coined it, the UFO hotspot of Ontario. And he wasn't kidding, because the filmmaker, who is still possibly working on my biography for Cinefest and other film festivals, a skeptic himself, actually filmed a UFO over Lake de Borgne, like something really oddly lit. The front half was lit, and there was a straight vertical line separating the front half, which was lit, from the back half that was totally pitch black. And this thing flew right over the lake. And he also filmed something on the North Channel. The North Channel is the area of water, the body of water on Lake Huron between Blind River and the west end tip of Manitoulin Island. And we had also shot there too. Well, the spots where my contact, Joan Morningstar, took me to, I was only there for one night this past weekend or 2 weekends ago. But if I were to be there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nights in a row, guaranteed I'd see something. So I'm going back. Plus, I heard additional Bigfoot reports. So,
tell us some of those stories that you heard from the First Nation folk when you were up there.
Well, my friend Joan sent me some pictures of rock carvings or rock paintings depicting what looks like an alien gray's head. And on this particular lake called Chidlow Lake, the First Nations stay on one side of the lake because they're not venturing on the other side. They say that's where the little people live. And the little people, I thought leprechauns, like, the kind of stories you hear from Newfoundland. But it says, no, not those little people. The other ones, they're little grays. I says, holy crap.
No kidding.
So whether they're in cahoots with Bigfoot or whatever, because she also took me to Bigfoot country, and I have a Bigfoot expert friend of mine who actually has been to Blind River area as well. And don't forget, Joan Morningstar she's Native, First Nations. They grew up in the bush. And her brother and ex-husband actually were chased out of the woods by Bigfoot. They know he's there. And tracks have been found eventually, I guess in the past, but I've never actually found any or seen any castings of them. But I have no doubts. But I grew up like everybody else believing Bigfoot was out west, way out west. But Blind River is a good spot for that. And ghosts, apparently. Joan told me of a ghostly encounter she had, and it even shocked one of her male police officer friends from First Nation, who had just investigated the accident in which that one fatality was the guy she described seeing in person.
What happened there, Michel?
She was in a convenience store where we had just bought, when I was there the weekend, we had to buy some stuff for breakfast, and she said she was in the same store. She had seen this guy with bushy gray hair, bushy gray beard, and kept saying that he hurt his head and he had an accident. And then she proceeded to give him a bottle of dish soap that he was just buying, and he walked off. She went to another part of the store or somewhere else soon after, and he shows up again, but this time he's leaning against the counter and he's shaking his leg and he's saying, my leg is hurting. So anyways, to make a long story short, she met up with her friend, the police officer from the reservation, because she said somebody walked away from some kind of a car accident and you should look into it. Anyways, he says, well, describe me the person you saw if you think somebody walked away, So she described it to him, and the police officer's jaw just dropped. He says, that you just described the guy, the one single fatality that occurred in a one car crash just moments ago. He had been on the scene just recently, just there. So it's like, holy crap. But I see Joan is also an abductee, and the thing with abductees is that they somehow develop psychic abilities, or they become extremely sensitive to other facets of the paranormal. So there's a lot of other stories I could get. I mean, I've been trying to look for the audio tape where I originally recorded Joan's stories, and I've misplaced it, so I may have to re-record her stories, including those ones and the Bigfoot report.
Well, that ghost story gave me goosebumps. Errol.
That's me.
And that's a good thing, I'm thinking.
Yeah, me too.
Where you're living in Peterborough. Now, Peterborough has a population probably the same size as Kingston, which is a little over 100,000 people.
Yeah, we're around, I think, 50,000. Yep.
Have you had any experiences similar to what Michel has described, either reportings of UFOs or your own experiences as well?
No, not here and not lately. Before I moved here, actually, I guess about 10 15, maybe even a little more, about 18 years ago, when MUFON Ontario, the Mutual UFO Network of Ontario, was still functioning. We had received a few reports of UFOs being spotted in Peterborough and slightly east of Peterborough along Highway 7. And we had gone out and checked out the stories. The usual type of story, I mean, nothing particularly exciting, run-of-the-mill UFOs. Objects being seen in the sky at night. And that was about it, really. Nothing, as I say, particularly exciting. I'm sounding dull tonight, but it's that's the way it was.
No, we're going to get some coffee in you, no problem, or a Red Bull, no problem.
I have my favorite innocent gun in my hand, a nice Scottish beer.
Oh, that's lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. As I say, folks, get the coffee going, the tea going, or obviously a beverage of your choice, and just relax. We've got a good hour and a half solid of great stories to tell you, and also some great real experiences. Errol, when you go out to investigate, when you did go out to investigate, what were some of the criteria you looked for to see if perhaps people were pulling your leg or just trying to pull off a prank?
Yeah. A good technique is the same sort of technique that the police use when they're doing investigations, is to get the witnesses to repeat the story several times and see if there's any deviation from one time to the next. Usually it's almost exactly the same words and the same emotions. And if they're not, then you have to ask yourself, is this person for real or not? Most reports that I've gone out and looked into, I have felt have been the real deal. There are not that many people who are looking for attention by reporting so-called UFOs or so-called sightings.
Yeah, it's true.
You find the same thing, Michel?
Yeah, it's so easy nowadays to, well, for me anyways, I try to make sure that it's easy for me to discern something valid from something invalid. Like you look at all the footage on YouTube, and whoever's going around faking UFO clips, they have no idea what real UFOs look like, because they're adding all kinds of attachments to UFOs. Like they're putting UFOs on YouTube that we would build if we were making science fiction films.
Yeah,
the real UFOs are so plain in shape and so they have no structure to them. Like sometimes, a lot of times, it's a light in the sky, but it's a light that highly behaves in a very unusual way, or the way it departs, or the way it arrives, or whatever. That's why I've had to create a page of criterias to look for these things, so that just like Errol said earlier, people going outside for a few seconds and assuming that they see a UFO when they should be staying outside for at least an hour and a half to see what that light is doing. And if it's a star or planet they're looking at, go back consecutive nights and make sure that it is still there in the same part of the sky, and you'll know it's a planet or a star.
Yeah, a lot of people mistake Venus and Sirius.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
UFOs.
Yeah.
And then, when they used to phone in their reports, we'd say, okay, which portion of the sky were you looking at? And they'd say, oh, to the west, and according to the day of the year, you knew that they were looking at Venus. It's flashing and spinning and changing colors, and it's so exciting. Well, no, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's Venus, and that's what Venus is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Et voilà, maintenant, vous êtes à côté Night Fright avec Brent Holland et Michel Deschamps. Michel, dites-nous votre première fois que vous voir un UFO pour TFO.
Oh, en français?
Oui, si tu veux.
Oh. Première fois, c'était à Hanmer en 74. En entre le 12 et le 15 juillet. Durant, je dirais, la journée de la fête à mon frère. Mon frère André, sa fête, c'est le 13 juillet. Puis j'avais vu une sphère métallique dans le ciel qui n'était pas attachée au sol. Rough translation for the English listeners, my first sighting was in 1974, the month of July, approximately or probably on the same day as my brother's birthday, which was July 13th. 1974. The reason why is because years later, after having had several years of doubting myself for the first sighting that I had, it was a metallic sphere that I saw above the treetops, but not tethered down to the ground, which I found kind of odd. And I wasn't sure if it was something I'd copied off TV or memorized from somewhere, but for years I doubted the sighting until I bought a used book in a bookstore in Niagara Falls, and it was UFO Canada by Errol Bondarchuk. And one of the chapters is Sudbury, Ontario, and Eastern Townships, July 12th to July 15th, 1974. So it kind of clicked in my head that, shit, that's when my brother was having a birthday, and we were sent outside at the end of our street where we used to have a 2-story building where the teenagers would have their dances upstairs at night. And during the day, especially in the summer, the younger kids were doing finger painting downstairs, and that's where we were at. But I stepped outside because the finger painting part didn't interest me at all. And I remember one guy was in the baseball field way far to my left, playing 21 by himself. He had a bat in one hand and a ball in the other. And I looked around, and there was not too many people there. And above the treetops, which at that time there was like a property that had an aluminum shed. A couple of U-Haul trailers were parked there. Today there's homes built there, but the treetops are still there, although a little bit shorter than from what I remember. But the metallic sphere, I did a sketch, and I did place it on my website, but I recently found a rendition done by somebody else, and it portrayed exactly what I saw. So I placed that sketch below mine or beside mine, and just to show. And in passing too, my website would not be in existence today if it wasn't for the help that I got from Errol Bruce Knapp. I just wanted to make that official because he's the one who gave the programs to get started, and because I didn't know what to do. I had all this material, and I wanted my original idea was to build a book, make a book, but I not knowing how to lay out the book. He says, "Well, why don't you just grab your info and make a website?" So I said, "Well, okay." So with Errol's help, that's how New Force came to be.
Give your website URL, Michel.
www.newforce.com. New Force stands for Northern. Each letter is for the first letter of each word. Northern Ontario UFO Research and Study. NOUFORS.com.
And est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose pour les personnes qui parlent français là?
Oui, il y a un côté français, mais it is not as extensive as the English side because English being the international language, and my mom will always give me crap for this because I've got to balance it out. But I did have a cousin. I just went to the family reunion this past August, and one of my cousins who's in the military at Valcartier, which is where we're the golf tournament, the family golf tournament.
Tell him thank you for his service. It's the 22.
Oh, yeah.
Don't mess with the 22s. That's for sure.
Well, the good news is he out of the blue, he offered to translate my website from English to French.
Fantastic.
So if he's that fluent in both languages, he's more than welcome to tackle any page he wants to tackle, and hopefully, eventually, both sides will be equally balanced.
Errol, how did you and Michel first meet? Did you lose a bet or something? That's what happened. That's right. No, I'm teasing. Of course.
No, we first met via my email list, I believe. Is that so, Michel? Is that how we first connected?
I think we met before that. Remember when TVO? Now this time it was TVO. TVO, no, it was TFO again. TFO again flew me down, flew me down to Toronto for a 5-minute interview. And this was at the convention center, or I forget the name. There's so many of those places down in Toronto. I don't know which one we were at, but I flew down. They all expenses paid by TFO for a 5-minute interview. And at that time, there was an ESP psychic fair at the convention center, and
Right.
MUFON Ontario had their table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I met Errol and Tom and Lise, and Rob McConnell was there too, of the X Chronicles. And that's when we met. And I got to man the table for a little bit. And I was told if I had warned them a few days earlier that I was coming down, I would have been one of the panelists instead of being in the audience, which was kind of cool to hear. But I was just like freshly just part of the MUFON Ontario gang and was meeting them more or less for the first time in person. And Errol and I have been friends ever since.
Yeah. And you have a much better memory than I.
You guys are funny. Now, when you guys exchanged information, did you come across much the same stories, and were you able to confirm and validate certain instances, perhaps filling in some blanks? I'll give you an example. Michel, if you came to Errol with a story from Northern Ontario, perhaps Errol may have heard about the story and been able to fill in some more of the details, something along those lines?
Actually, Brent, that would have been highly unlikely because Michel is the investigator up in Northern Ontario. So any reports that came from Northern Ontario would have come from Michel.
I see.
Yeah, a lot of people still don't know who to report to or what organization to report to when they have sightings. So the likelihood of someone up north getting in touch with MUFON Ontario is highly unlikely. Anything good that came in from up there is via Michel.
Bravo, Michel.
And especially now that MUFON Ontario is defunct, more or less, pretty well. I mean, I still have people coming up to me and say, "Where do you officially report sightings now?" You know, a lot of our Ontario sightings are being reported to the Seattle National UFO Reporting Center, managed by Peter Davenport. So it kind of sucks sometimes when you hear like a Sudbury sighting report from Seattle, Washington. So it's like, okay, but I can understand the frustration because I was there myself when I first reported my second sighting, which was the one that made me come out of the ufological closet, as they say. Where could I report it? It took me 3 days to gather enough nerve to call the cops and tell the police about it. What did they do? They kept me on the phone line long enough to determine whether or not I was nuts. And after that, I realized either I do something myself or find out what to do with all my info. And then Stan Friedman, famous nuclear physicist, suggested I join MUFON Ontario. Not necessarily because he was a chairperson of MUFON at the time, but he's the one who got me involved in the group, and then we became the reporting center for Ontario for a while.
Errol, could you tell us about your time with Pirate Radio? This is fascinating to me because
it is.
Yeah.
I had just come out of the British Army. I was 22, and I was working for the Automobile Association, like the CAA in London. And one Sunday morning, I got up and had some time to spare and was fiddling with the radio, and I came across this new sound, a new radio station called Radio Caroline. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful. Listen to the music they're playing. And then in one of the breaks, the disc jockey on board, Simon D., said, we're looking for disc jockeys out here, and if you'd like to get involved, mail an audition tape to 6 Chesterfield Gardens in London. And good luck. So I had to work. I was working the night shift at that time at the Automobile Association. So I sat down with my reel-to-reel and I made a demo tape. And I did my overnight at the Automobile Association in Leicester Square. And the following morning, I headed off to Chesterfield Gardens. Got there fairly early. I think it was about 8 or something. And the doors were locked, so I sat and waited. And eventually this nice Australian man came along and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I brought my demo tape, my audition tape for a job on the ship, on the radio station. And he said, well, you better come upstairs tomorrow. Anyway, it turned out that he was one of the partners in Radio Caroline. And he sat and played my tape while I was there. And he said, well, that's not bad. And then the phone rang, and it was the shipping agency in Harwich who looked after the tendering of the ship, the supplies and safe passage for the disc jockeys. And the shipping agent told Alan Crawford, was his name, that the one guy on board the ship who could drive the audio board was taken off in an emergency. He had appendicitis. So Crawford said, hang on a minute, and covered the mouthpiece on the phone and said, can you drive a Gates board? Soundboard. And I said, yes, of course, because one soundboard is much like the other.
Very true.
And he went back to the phone and said, okay, hang on again. Can you go out to the ship now? And I said, yeah. And so I did. And later that day, I was sitting driving the Gates board for these guys with lovely radio voices that one can only find in England. And within, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, I was actually on air and doing my own shows. And the guys with the lovely radio voices all had to leave the ship because they were horribly seasick in the first nasty storm that they had there, a force 10 gale. So that started me off in pirate radio. I sort of not took exception, but pirate radio, the movie, was a pile of old dung phooey. The producers had spent months talking to former pirate radio disc jockeys, not just Radio Caroline, but Radio London and Radio England and Britain Radio, and gathering all of these stories and facts, and then went off and made that awful, awful movie, which, I mean, it's kind of nice if you don't know about life on the ocean wave and pirate radio. We never had women visitors on the ship unless it was a pop star who came out with a manager and a bodyguard, and she was there an hour and then she was gone. But, you know, and when we were on for 2 weeks and then 1 week off, and when we were on for 2 weeks, we didn't leave the ship. You know, not like this bunch of turkeys in pirate radio. And there were only 2 things that were really true in that movie.
What were they?
One was that the radio station was on a ship, and 2, the music of the time. And I don't know if you noticed, but there weren't any Beatles in there because Yoko Ono wouldn't give the producers permission to use Beatles music.
Really?
Really.
Oh, jeez. Now,
yeah, it was really sad. I mean, you know, because now, as far as the real history and possibly some damn good stories that could be told in a movie, it's not going to happen because the story of pirate radio has already been done.
Why were you guys out in the middle of, just off the shores of the UK in the first place?
Because we were stupid and young.
What was the BBC doing
Well,
that was preventing?
there were four BBC radio channels, all of which were awful, and the BBC, since its inception, had a deal with the Musicians Union that there would only be a limited amount of what they called needle dropping a stylus on a record, and the other percentage would be live musicians playing in studio. So the music that got played on BBC radio stations, for the most part, was bloody awful. No rock music, no pop music. Well, popular music. Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of really crappy middle-of-the-road music played on BBC. So there was this, and then there was Radio Luxembourg, out of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, who broadcast in English from 7 in the evening until 1 or 2. But what wasn't good about that was that all of the record companies in the UK owned hour here, half hour there, and all they played was what Decca and RCA and all of those old obscure record labels wanted played on Radio Luxembourg. So there was really nowhere to turn for music except jukeboxes in the record stores. So this was observed by both Alan Crawford. Alan Crawford had a little record label called Carnival Records, and it was all blue beat and ska and rocksteady music. And basically the precursor of reggae. And he had this whole label with a whole bunch of artists, and he couldn't get them on radio anywhere. So he'd heard of this Swedish woman who ran a couple of offshore radio stations on ships. And then they'd been put out of business by the Swedish government, and there were these 2 ships that were available. So they were conscripted to do the same thing off the coast of England, 3.5 miles off the coast, which was, back in those days, territorial limits in the sea were 3 miles. So 3.5 miles out, you were in international waters and safe. So that's where we set up, anchored out there, and broadcast pop music from dawn till 11, 12 o'clock at night.
If you had wanted to set up a radio station in the UK, what would have been the ramifications? Would they have licensed you in the first place?
No.
Not a chance in hell.
Not a chance in those days. I mean, there are just all kinds of garbage FM stations in the UK now. They sound just as bad as the commercial stations here. We got all these commercial stations here in Peterborough, Ontario. I think there are 4 or 5 of them, and you switch from one frequency to the next. You can't tell the difference. They're all playing the same music.
I completely agree with you, my friend.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we have the internet and smartphones and so yeah.
And when did you stop being a DJ? When did that happen?
On Caroline?
Yes.
On the Pirates, I left when the British government clamped down on the pirates and made it illegal for any British subject to work for them, supply them with supplies, food, drink, etc., advertise on them, or transport people to and from the ships. The writing was on the wall. It was time to leave. And to work for the BBC, you had to submit a script of every word you were going to say in a popular music radio program a week in advance, in triplicate. It was ridiculous. So I just gave up on the whole thing and came to Toronto, joined my family here.
Now, do you find our Canadian Broadcast Corporation, the CBC, have they fallen into that pattern?
Into? The
same pattern that the BBC?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. Well, probably in the beginning, yeah, but there was always commercial radio here. CBC was really an afterthought. I love CBC. I think CBC Radio is one. In fact, I'm wearing a CBC Radio T-shirt. I love what CBC is doing, both Radio 1 and 2. And all these people who badmouth CBC Radio, I don't understand.
Fair enough. Now, one of the things that I find a big demise in is talk radio. And that's part of the reasons why I'm doing my shows, is to get these stories out, because a lot of the information that I used to get from radio was from talk radio, especially the news and things like that, and alternative news. So are you still doing your podcast, Errol?
No, I did 7 years on CFRB in Toronto and also CJAD in Montreal. Weekends. I did a Strange Days Indeed was my UFO radio show. Strange Days Indeed, based on the John Lennon song "Nobody Told Me," in which he sings about his UFO sighting over New York. I did that for 7 years, and then something unheard of in broadcasting. Usually, if you're being let go or fired, you do your last radio show, and the program director or the general manager is outside the studio door and says, "I'm sorry, you're gone." And they take you to your little bunk, your locker in the lounge, and you clear out your stuff, and they take you out the door and take off take your security pass card. In my case, I was told a week in advance that the following week would be my last show. They treated me really well. They're lovely people. Steve Couch is wonderful, former general manager, program director there. And then I thought, well, I'm going to do podcasts. I have all the technology here. I have the equivalent of a $500,000 recording studio and a couple of computers and a mixer and microphones here. So I was producing. I was recording the various segments for my podcast, and then being an anal retentive Scorpio, I would sit and tidy everybody up, remove all the ums and ahs and you-knows, and then package it up and put it out. But even that, that became, no offense intended, but everybody and their dog is now doing, radio podcasts on the web. Some of them are good, like yours, and some of them are bloody awful, but there's most people don't understand the difference between bloody awful and well-produced. They don't care. So I felt that I was flogging a dead horse, and I was getting tired. Been there, done that, got a few grubby T-shirts, and that's it.
How did you get involved with UFOs?
Me?
Yes, Errol.
Oh.
Don't worry, Michel. I'm coming right back to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm doing a lot of talking here, guys. And the money's not very good. How did I get it? Well,
This is my segue to get back to Michel, by the way, folks. This is what's called a segue. See, I bring up UFOs. I'll get Errol to talk about his experiences, and then I'm going to switch to Michel.
Oh, yeah, that's clever. I like that.
I'm genius. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
It's the coffee I've been drinking
you should
from
work at
Starbucks.
radio.
No, I should get paid for working in radio.
Yeah,
That would be the anomaly.
Yeah, well, that was the nice thing about the podcast was I had subscribers, who, I didn't make a lot of money, and I was enough to cover my expenses as far as hosting the domains and things that I do, like Michel's. How did I get involved? 1947, my dad was a Canadian in the British Army, and the family was on Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar. My dad was an oxymoron. He was military intelligence. And one of the postings was to Gibraltar. And listening, BBC was brought in via a local transmitter. And listening to the BBC News in July of 1947, and they had a report about a flying disc that had been recovered by the Army Air Force in the States outside Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh,
And that was my first experience. I still remember that news broadcast vividly. I was an avid reader. I was, in 1947, I was 5. I'd learned to read when I was 4, my dad had taught me.
Wow.
And the next time he took me to the library, I wanted to know about, flying strange things in the air. And, of course, there was nothing. But it did get me into the fantasy and science fiction area and the ghost stories.
That's fantastic. Folks, we're coming up to break now. We're speaking with Errol Bruce Knapp, of course, and we're speaking with Michel Deschamps. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guests' links. I was going to say books. Michel hopefully will have a book out soon, and I'm pushing him to do that. Links, and that'll take you right to each one's websites, www.nightfrightshow.com. Guys, we're coming up to a break at in probably about 30 seconds. The music just plays automatic, so I can't control it. Stick with us. The break is for 6 minutes, so it gives you time to go get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or a beverage of your choice. We'll get that going. When we come back, I'm going to continue with the segue, and I'm going to ask Michel Deschamps to explain about the radar base, the military radar base, and sightings that were seen in Sudbury. We'll be right back, folks. Stick with us. Welcome back, folks. Welcome to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Thanks for sticking around. If you're just joining us, we still have a full hour of broadcast left with 2 incredible guests. We're having a roundtable tonight on UFOs in Canada, folks, with Errol Bruce Knapp. He's been a researcher for the better part of 18 years, I guess, and probably all his life. He's joining us from Peterborough, Ontario, and all the way from Sudbury, Ontario, in Northern Ontario, is Michel Deschamps. And we're talking about various aspects of UFO sightings, collecting information, archiving information, and the various sites in and around Canada, particularly Ontario. And we're going to come back to that in just a second when I'm going to ask Michel what happened up north. There used to be an old radar station just outside of Sudbury, and some of the things that took place there. But first of all, I just want to tell you my weekly plug for my new book, which is called JFK Assassination, From the Oval Office to Dealey Plaza. As fans of this show know, that nobody covers the Kennedy assassinations, plural, the RFK assassinations in there too, folks, as well as the Martin Luther King assassination better than Night Fright. That's our forte, without a question. What makes this book unique, and it's a book I've just authored, is it has the last interview with Ted Sorensen in it. Ted Sorensen was JFK's speechwriter. He was also the man that JFK tasked to write the letter to Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis to get Khrushchev to back down. He virtually saved the world, not with the sword, but with the pen. I had the glorious opportunity to not only interview him when I was in Sudbury on the telephone, but I spent an afternoon with him in Manhattan. And I'll tell you, he changed my life. I've never seen, I've been blessed, folks. I've interviewed Errol Bruce Knapp now, Michel Deschamps, and all these great, prime ministers of Canada, speakers of the House, etc., Nobel Peace Laureates. I was down in New York when I met Ted, and the reason I was down there was to interview Nobel Peace Laureates. I have never met anybody with a global vision for peace like Ted Sorensen had. And I came away from that meeting knowing that JFK would not have been JFK without Ted Sorensen. In much the same sense, the Beatles would not have been the Beatles without George Martin. That's how integral Sorensen was to saving the world and the Kennedy administration. That last interview is verbatim right in the book, and he also confirms conspiracy in the Kennedy assassination. Not a coup d'etat. The government indeed did cover it up, but you'll find out in the book why they covered up. and why it was necessary for the cover-up, and why there was a conspiracy. Other people I interviewed for the book, the first African-American Secret Service agent, Abraham Bolden, who was handpicked by JFK, not on duty that day. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. He was a whistleblower after the assassination on some of the things the Secret Service were supposed to do and didn't. It's funny, right in the news right now at this moment, several days ago, somebody got into the White House. The Secret Service once again dropped the ball. So this is continuing on over and over and over and over again. The same problems exist. And this is what Mr. Bolden was a whistleblower about. The doctor who worked on JFK, Dr. Robert McClelland, is in the book. I interviewed him as well, and he tells of the back of JFK's head being blown out and him witnessing that, but nowhere does that appear on any of the autopsy photos. So again, once again, there was a cover-up. James Tague, who has just passed away, so this is historical, his testimony to the Warren Commission, and he is inadvertently responsible for the magic bullet. James Tague was the third person wounded in Dealey Plaza that day. There was President Kennedy, of course, mortally wounded. Sitting in front of JFK was Governor Connolly. He was wounded, but he survived his wounds. James Tague was the third person. He was standing in Dealey Plaza over near the triple underpass, and he was sprayed with a ricochet shot. So the Warren Commission, folks, I'll do this very quickly because I want to get back to Errol Bruce Knapp and Michel Deschamps. This is all in the book, JFK Assassination from Dealey Plaza to the Oval Office. You can get it at www.nightfrightshow.com. The Warren Commission, 50 years ago, September 24th, came out and said one shooter, the first Warren Commission report, there would soon be two, said that one shooter, 3 bullets. 2 bullets hit Kennedy, one of them being the headshot that killed Kennedy, all from the back, and 1 bullet hit Governor Connolly, causing all his wounds. Now, if that wasn't enough to swallow, then along came James Tague. James Tague said, no, I was wounded too. So now what are you going to do? You've already committed to only 3 bullets. Now you've got 3 people wounded and 4 wounds. So what they did was they scrapped the first Warren report. The second one came out and said, okay, now we've got to look at this more carefully. Okay, now we've got 1 bullet we know that hit James Tague, so now there's 2 bullets left. We've got another bullet that we know was the kill shot coming from the back, they said, that killed JFK. So we've got 1 bullet left that is supposed to go into the back of JFK at a downward motion that should come out his chest. But instead, no, it ricochets off nothing inside of JFK's body, and I use the word nothing on purpose. Ricocheted upwards to exit his neck. Now, if it's in an upward trajectory, it would have went right over Governor Connolly's head, sitting in front of JFK. Instead of that, no, it zigzags and comes right back down, goes into Governor Connolly, breaks his rib, exits his chest, and goes into Governor Connolly's wrist, breaks his wrist, comes out of his wrist, and goes into his leg. The bullet is found in pristine condition, meaning there was no deformation on the bullet at all. It's found in a gurney lying there at Parkland Hospital. And to top it off, no blood, no tissue on this bullet. So most people call it the magic bullet. I call it the Cirque du Soleil bullet. The book, JFK Assassination, everything is explained in this book, folks, and it's first-person witnesses. It's historical, and it's from a Canadian author, and it's the only book of its genre with Ted Sorensen in it. The only book from somebody who was in the inner circle, sitting right beside JFK. JFK Assassination from the Oval Office to Dealey Plaza, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Order the book, order the companion documentaries that are there as well. While you're there, click on tonight's guests' links, and that will take you right to their websites as well. Our guest tonight, Errol Bruce Knapp, Michel Deschamps. Thanks, guys, for sticking around and putting up with me doing that little plug for my book. Michel, question for you, my friend. When I was up in Sudbury, you had been telling me stories about the old radar base that was part, I think, of the DEW line, if I'm not mistaken, during the Cold War, and
Yeah.
some of the anomalies, the UFO anomalies that were surrounding that. Could you tell us one of them?
Yeah. Actually, there was 5 anomalies, but the public only knew of 4. And as it was later told to me by a radar technician who actually contacted me, he said that it would have been impossible for the radar to have tracked the smaller UFOs, smaller meaning 40 to 50 feet wide, oval shaped craft, because they would have been lost in a ground clutter. What they were tracking on radar was actually in excess of the size of the largest bomber plane or whatever plane we had in the 70s. And it was parked over Lively, which is a town that is, from the radar base, it was thought 30 nautical miles south. So the 4 smaller UFOs, 40 to 50 foot craft object that were seen in town, one was hovering apparently over Pioneer Manor, which is a nursing home, where my friend Todd Fraser, by the way, is a housekeeper there. Another UFO branched off from the group and followed a McGraw family to Chelmsford, which is another good 30 so minutes away from the city, northwest. The other 2 objects, I'm not exactly sure where they were seen, but they were still maneuvering around town. And it's been surmised now, obviously, that some of these smaller ships cannot traverse wide areas of space unless they come in on an aircraft carrier type vehicle, which is probably the large object that was being tracked on radar over Lively.
Like a mothership or something.
Yeah, between 42,000 to 72,000 feet it would maneuver. The radar technician was an expert in fixing radars, but not, as he said, an expert in looking through binoculars. He says his commanding officer, looking through the binoculars, said that he saw cratered surface texture on the object. But he himself, Leif Lauritsen, said he could not see such detail while looking through binoculars. But like he said, I'm no expert at looking through binoculars, but this other guy was trained in the visual, abilities that he had. But the radar base is no longer there. It used to be sort of like my mecca. I used to go up there, sneak up there. Not much vandalism going on there. The building itself was doing a pretty good job of falling apart. But the people who bought the property for peanuts, the PMQs, the houses actually are now low rental units. But the radar base is no longer there. I'd been trying to go back there because the last time I was actually inside the building, I had found a gauge in the boiler room that was still intact. Vandals hadn't gotten to that one. The glass wasn't broken, and it was dated 1954. That's the year the base was built. And I kicked myself now for not having paid somebody to give me a ride so I could go up there with a wrench and get that souvenir. But I did get another souvenir. I got the weight restriction sheet from inside the elevator. And it's dated 1986, 1987 was when it was due, and it's from the Department of National Defense. So
that's pretty cool, buddy.
That's the one souvenir I have from the radar base. Plus, me and Todd, we went out there and we had our picture taken in front of the installation. So it's pretty classic. But it's a famous case. It was made. It was mentioned in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, and elsewhere. But although I did see on a documentary once that they placed it in the wrong place when they were doing a map area indicating the other 4 military installations in the States that had been intruded upon by UFOs within the same 2 months. Actually, sightings here were leading up from July, up on Manitoulin Island, right through August, and September, October, November. But in the States, I think they occurred mainly in October and November. And they had placed the radar base way on the other side of Lake Superior. So,
Oops.
it was just a little glitch there. But it was made famous because of that time and that happening. And the funny thing was, I was in the 6th grade or the 5th grade, and I don't remember the sirens going off. Some people I did talk to remember the sirens going off at the radar base, but I might have been indoors. I'm not sure. But
That
looking
must have
back
been
now,
terrifying because that would mean attack, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it would have been like DEFCON 3, I imagine, or something like that.
So we just had Robert Salas on the show, by the way, telling his story. And pardon me?
Nice.
And it was riveting. So this was all around the same time. See, you're educating me. Folks, tune into Night Fright because the host gets educated every show. You think I'm educating you, eh? No.
That radar base was Falconbridge, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
It was interesting while you were talking, Michel. It because another interesting and kind of famous case was the Falcon Lake incident too.
Oh, in Manitoba.
Yeah, where a prospector was out prospecting out in the wild, and he heard this sound, and he looked up, and there was this disc-shaped aircraft that landed close by him, and he went up to it and walked around it, and he could hear voices speaking a language coming from inside the language he couldn't understand. And then he ended up stopped by a grill on the side of this circular aircraft, and it suddenly took off, and he got this blast of burning heat came out of the grill on the side of the object, and it burnt his shirt and burnt a grill shape into his chest. Michel was the man's name, and he got quite sick, and eventually he was taken down to, what's the military hospital in the States?
Walter Reed?
Walter Reed, thank you. He was taken down to Walter Reed and examined, and nobody could explain the burns that he had suffered and the illness that he was going through.
Was it radiation sickness, Errol?
Well, that's what the suspicion is.
Yeah. But the medical records were never released. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Errol, while we're on the subject of military bases, a good friend of mine just recently got transferred from Kingston. Folks, Kingston is, for those of you south of the border, is our version of West Point. This is where we train all our guys to be leaders. So he's just been transferred to the biggest Air Force base in Canada, which is Trenton, which is again a stone's throw from where Errol is in Peterborough. The first time I was out there was on the weekend. It's huge. I mean, this sucker is massive. It's a mini city all of its own. And, with the big aircraft and everything, I don't want to give too much away, or I'll be giving away national secrets or something. But, Errol, I was just wondering, is there any cases or any sightings over the base? Is the base a magnet in the same sense that this radar base that was near Michel was a magnet?
I'm not sure about in Ontario. I mean, there've been all kinds of instances of all kinds of just really weird activity happening over military bases, but be they Air Force or Army. For many, many decades now, it's been going on.
Yeah,
I mean, there are some incredible recordings taken, and I'm desperately trying. It's one of the things about being retired is your memory tends to do that too.
It'll come back, don't worry.
But I'm sorry?
You're going through the files right now. That's all. It'll flip up, and you'll be able to think of it in a second. I was thinking of Rendlesham and areas.
Oh,
like
yeah. Well,
that.
yeah, Rendlesham is a famous one, yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any Canadian ones like that as well.
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe Michel has memory of one, but not that I'm, no.
Okay.
I did get some interesting clippings. My friend Bruce Roach, who lives on the south shore of Lake Simcoe, had an amazing collection of news clippings, and one of the news clippings was so large, I had to scan it in 4 sections, and it was written by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Robert Kilderhose or Schillerhose. He was an F-86 pilot who broke the speed record cross country back in 1956. Or 57, and as he flew over McLeod, Alberta, he actually photographed a UFO in the clouds.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a famous case that was analyzed by Bruce Maccabee. And I've got the actual clipping, and he was a part-time journalist or a freelancer, and I can't believe that I have an article written by him, and it's so huge. Another interesting story related to nuclear missiles, which I recently heard. One of my friends buys coins, silver coins, from a dealer in North Bay. And he had me put in touch with this dealer because this dealer has another client of his who's a former U.S. Air Force officer, lives in Barrie, and he remembers that, I don't know what year, I'm trying to get the dealer to hopefully sort of nudge the former U.S. Air Force guy to contact me so I can get this story on tape, where they were at a military installation in Quebec that apparently also had nuclear missiles there. I thought North Bay was the only one that had Bomark missiles. And one of the missiles was defective, so they flew one other one to replace it. The radar picked up a second blip, and they had the guys go outside and take a look. Behind the plane, carrying the nuclear missile, was a UFO.
Oh my God.
The plane came in to land, and the UFO departed the area in 10 seconds. He says, if it had been a plane, the plane would still have been in sight in 30 seconds. This thing flew away in 10 seconds. So I was like, that's the story I want. I want to record the story, because if this guy's willing to talk, and apparently he is, he's 77 years old. I want to know which Canadian, which Quebec base this was, and what time, when, and what was the circumstance of the before, the during, and after, because you don't hear that too often. Where while UFOs have always followed nuclear vessels, it was the FDR in the 40s, because the FDR was the only one commissioned to carry nuclear weapons. It had several UFO incidences there associated with that naval ship. Of course, all the military installations, both in Russia and in the States and in Canada, were visited by UFOs because we had nukes. So there's been a long association. As a matter of fact, TFO crew, they're just left. That was one of their questions. How, has there been a long association with UFOs in the military? And the answer is yes, going way back to the beginning.
This question is for both of you, by the way. We'll start with Errol first. The First Nation folk in the far north, the really far north, is there any lore or oral history of buried UFOs? My thinking is that as the ice melts more and more, artifacts of various natures are going to start to be more and more exposed, in much the same sense that artifacts are continuing to be revealed all the time in the Holy Land. Is there any record of anything like that happening?
Not that I've heard of buried UFOs, and Canada's Aboriginal people have just tons and tons of stories that are UFO related. In fact, was it the APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, up here in Canada, ran a series of interviews with various natives who had seen or have had UFO experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Indians and Aliens. Yeah.
That
6
was the
episodes.
one. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
good series too.
Yeah. Pretty good. 6 episodes. I have a friend of mine. She's Natalie Lajeunesse. She lives up in Timmins, and she actually is the mediator between First Nation and the mining companies. And she actually spoke to some of these people. She herself has seen a lot of UFOs up in Timmins, and she's a good friend of mine. I finally got to meet her in person when she came down for a conference in Sudbury, and she was staying at the local motel there, the Radisson Hotel. And so she told me that she had spoken to the very same people who had related their story in that 6 episode series. So
Errol, do you think part of the attraction to Michel and I have talked about this? Do you think part of the attraction might be water? You know, Canada's blessed with all this fresh water, the most fresh water in the world. I think of Lake Ontario, the sightings. People still say that they see lights all the time, strange lights emanating from below the surface, especially off Hamilton, the shores of Hamilton. And we know where Michel lives, and I can attest to this, folks. I spent 3.5 years there. There's a lake every 3 feet. Honest to God.
Really?
There's water everywhere.
UFO hovering over every second one, sucking up water.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think there's something with the water? Maybe they need water for their aircraft, or maybe even to bring back home. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but there's also the stories of UFOs hovering over power lines. The big distribution lines.
yeah,
And sparks flying between the lines and the UFO, and then power failures as a result of that. The Great Northeast Blackout that happened a few years ago now, not the most recent one, but that supposedly was triggered by some sort of flying object hovering over power lines.
yeah, 1965.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, a pilot actually saw the object coming in for a landing at Syracuse Airport.
Really?
Yeah, and in Sudbury, and not just in Sudbury. I've heard of other subsequent stories in the exact same detail. My friend UFO Don Campbell had witnessed 2 UFOs that actually came down, well, one after the other, but not right away. The first one came down for 15 minutes and sucked up the power off the power line. And as it touched the power line, there was an appendage that actually came out from the bottom of the ship and would hook onto the line. And the UFO would catch on a brighter glow than a normal glow it would have as it came down. And it would stay there for 15 minutes and the lights would dim. Then it would detach the hook. It looked like a paper clip or whatever, hook onto the line, and it would go straight up 5 miles high and park next to the other UFO. Then the other UFO descended and stayed again for 15 minutes. But this time it sucked so much power that all the lights went out. We're talking like 3 o'clock in the morning when most people are asleep. Of course, there wouldn't be too many people noticing this. But who would be left to pay for the bill? Of course, the public. Because Don then subsequently went down to the exchange, the hydro exchange place, and he spoke to another Don Campbell there who said, yeah, this has happened several times, but Ontario Hydro knows about it, but we're not supposed to tell anybody about it. And I've read since then, I've read other stories where the same appendage comes from underneath the underside of the UFO and it hooks onto the line, sort of basically either by induction, as Don would describe it, or it actually hooks onto the line and there's direct connection with the power line. And how they can take that much power directly, I can't imagine. I don't know.
I don't know how they'd store it. That's a lot of juice.
Yeah.
That's one hell of a lot of juice.
So it's amazing whether they brought the power back to power themselves up or brought it back to the mothership or whatever. It's like, okay, there's free energy for them, but we're the ones left having to pay for the bill.
Well, I had John Lear on the show too, and he was talking about alien moon bases and bases on Mars. And, from a strategic point of view, if I were going to watch and observe what was happening on this planet, I guess I would either want a base close by, it only makes sense, and a mothership perhaps. What are your guys' views? We'll start with Errol and then Michel. of perhaps alien moon bases and bases on Mars? Is this just pure science fiction?
Um, I don't know. There have been interesting stories about bases on the far side of the moon, about astronauts landing on the moon close to alien craft. Supposedly, there's another reason why we haven't been back to the moon in a very long time. As for bases on Mars, well, I mean, in reality, our reality is not necessarily the real reality, so that anything is possible.
That makes sense.
And it's a matter of time before things will or will not be confirmed,
Yeah.
Michel, what's your perspective, my friend?
Well, the moon makes perfect sense in a way, because the odd thing is that the backside, we never get to see it. So it's a perfect hiding place for them. Of course, who knows whether they knew that somehow one day we'd actually fly there. But to keep an eye on us, yeah, I would not toss aside the idea that they would want to be in close proximity, whether it's, especially in places that normally they would be unattainable, like in the deep oceans, where we can only go. Like UFOs have been tracked on sonar going at depths where a submarine would implode. So who knows? Until we get verification, or whoever is in the know will admit. But like Errol, I'm beginning to think that there won't be a disclosure, not from the government's part. I think it's going to take place from having more sightings and more people will all of a sudden be made aware. But with today's generation, where everybody's on cell phones texting to each other and looking down while walking on the sidewalk, who the hell are going to know? Who the hell is going to notice all these flying UFOs, anyways? Except for those of us who are already awake and living outside the box.
And looking for them specifically as well. Next question's for Errol, and of course, Michel, I want to get your perspective as well. The ancient alien phenomena that's on television right now, and there's all kinds of shows and documentaries. Errol, your perspective on that?
On ancient aliens, or the vast number of documentaries that
no, the actual phenomena. In other words, is they us? Are we them?
Again, it's hard to say. I mean, there's a fascinating story about an old planet called Maldek, and it was an idyllic place to live, an idyllic world, and some people got bored and they invented this weapon, which the Martians saw was going to destroy the planet, and so the Martian ships, the cities of Shan, landed on the planet and took off all of the white magicians. The black magicians were the ones that had invented this weapon. And no sooner had they done that and moved those beings to Mars that Maldek blew up. And who knows what was on Mars before that incredible comet strike, that has left an enormous scar on the planet, and it's posited that the water that was on the oceans that were on Mars all got blown into space, along with types of life that ended up here on this blue marble. And talking about is us them, or is them us? It's a possibility that we are actually descendants of the original Martians who came here after rescuing the people of Maldek? I don't know. You know, I mean, there are enough things down here that puzzle me without getting into the possibilities of things happening elsewhere.
I hear
And
you.
when you consider that there are billions and billions of suns, not to mention multiple billions of planets, you know, to think that out of all that almost incomprehensible number of objects out there in space, planetary bodies, that there would not be a race or a civilization who has spent the last 100,000 years traveling, you know, and coming across places like here.
You know, I get asked that too all the time, Errol and Michel.
And the possibility of this being a science lab, you know?
Yeah.
I
pray to God we're not the smartest race in the whole universe. Because if we are, we're in deep
all
trouble.
the universes and all the galaxies. Heaven help them.
Yeah.
I think that's why they're observing us, is because, as Michel always tells me, the kids have the matches, meaning nuclear weapons. Michel, your perspective?
Well, of all the UFO related things that interest me, the humanoid reports seem to indicate that there's, like I have listed on my website, like 85 different kinds that have been seen, and I've had to separate those from the repeat offenders, as I call them, the ones that perform the abductions, on a separate page, because I didn't want people to confuse the fact that there's many races that are coming here, and there's a lot of one-timers that are coming here. Very few cases seem to repeat themselves except for the abduction performing ones, like the little white-clad beings that handed that wafer cookie to the one man in was it Minnesota, I think. Almost reminded me of the two small creatures that were seen in Grand Mare, Quebec, just a few years ago in 1998. The humanoid sighting reports are very far in between, but I think some of them are probably making it here for the very first time. Maybe I've gotten word from other people, the other races, that hey, there's a backwards world, out here that. It could be an interesting subject for lab experiments or whatever, or they're just explorers, taking rock samples, plant samples, human samples, animal samples, and going back where they came from, or just passing through.
The other thing is, I was going to ask you guys, do you feel that governments around the world are cognizant of what's taking place and are just holding back disclosure? And I'll tell you why. I had Paul Hellyer on the show. And by the way, folks, Paul Hellyer is he's retired now, but he was the Canadian Minister of Defense.
And a loopy old man.
Okay, then. Okay. Oops.
And he really is.
Go ahead, Errol, please.
That's a story for another day. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say he believes fully that the governments are working in tandem, if you will, with alien species. And also he firmly believes the old Avro arrow, that there is one actually intact down at Area 51 of all places.
That's you can't verify that, but I found when I went down and I stayed at Errol's, and my friends stayed at a motel. We went to the symposium at the University of Toronto in 2005. And I found it cool that the former Minister of Defense would be there. But, one way or the other, I didn't really get into the conversations as my friends did. But they were stunned that for the Minister of Defense, he knew very little about UFOs. I said, well, maybe he was too busy and preoccupied with something else. Even if a UFO report had come across his desk, maybe it was not his thing to look into that because he had other things to deal with. It's disappointing, too, because you would figure a Minister of Defense would obviously be on top of things when it concerning UFOs. But my friends were thoroughly disappointed with the with his lack of knowledge apparently at the time. Now maybe he's gotten better.
His total knowledge was based on Philip Corso's book.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, and Philip Corso is I don't know, is another loopy old man, I think.
Don't hold back, Errol. Tell her how you.
No, I won't. You know, what are they going to do to me?
No, that's great.
Take
that's
my
what
radio
Night Fright
show
for.
away from me?
No, that's what Night Fright's about. It's for that. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us your thoughts. Do you think the governments are cognizant of what may be going on, or are they in the dark as much as we are?
I think there's an the man who wrote the book on the abduction seminars at MIT many years
C.D. Bryant.
C.D.D. Bryant, right? Cordy Bryant.
Yeah.
One of the clips in the opening of my Strange Days Indeed radio show program was C.D.D. Bryant saying, one, for the first time in our history, we're studying something
that's
studying us.
Yeah.
And the second one, the second clip that always sticks in my mind of his is, if I were the Secretary of the Air Force and these things were flying in and out of my airspace, I'd deny that anything was going on.
Interesting perspective.
So I think I'm pretty sure there were a lot of government people back in the late 40s to the mid to late 50s who knew a lot. And that's a diminishing number because they've all died off. Yeah. So, yeah, while there probably are, based on a really restricted need-to-know basis nowadays, there probably are a few people who have knowledge, if not access to that information. Not as many as there were.
Yeah.
What amazes me is the fact that the president of the free world, of the United States, or the leader of the free world, if you will, does not have the tippy-toppest secret clearance. There is somebody beyond him. There's a whole top secret clearance beyond the president.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 38 levels above top secret. So
there's 38?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that. So who has access to all this stuff, if not the elected representative?
At the very top of that 38 are the reptilians.
Who live below the Vatican, apparently.
Hey, one good book, though, your listeners, if they want one good book that could sort of give them an idea, a picture, not a complete picture, of how the military handled UFOs from the get-go, and how they lied to us publicly, saying there's nothing to it, but yet behind the scenes they were shaking in their boots and saying, okay, what the hell is this? Is this Nazi Germany? Is this Russian? It would be UFOs in Government, a historical inquiry. It was given to me as a gift from Jan Aldrich, who's one of the contributors. And this book is as thick as a phone book. And it's basically the result, full picture puzzle. Well, they don't, like I said, they don't have all the pieces, but they have such a majority of pieces that they were able to put the book together. This book is based on all the documents that have been released via lawsuits or leaked, and basically puts together a picture of how the military was lying to us publicly, but yet behind the scenes they were frantically panicky about were they German technology, like new technology developed by the Germans, or was it Russian? And then they were passing the buck to each other. One colonel would pass the information to somebody else and say, here, you deal with this flying saucer subject. We don't want to deal with it. And so when you read the book, I haven't read the whole thing because it's, like I said, it's big, but it's worth the read because I bought it for 4 different people, and it included my former biology teacher from Anmer High School, who was a skeptic then, but recently has gotten me some other UFO related stuff, and I figured, well, if I'm going to get anybody anything, including my friends who have just turned 50 along with myself, I bought books for them too. And because I recommend it highly. It's a good learning tool to see how the military was handling UFOs from the get-go, from the ghost ships, ghost rockets sightings in Scandinavia to anything that's happened since then till whatever year it ends. I'm not sure exactly what year it stops. But the documents, I mean, if it's anything like the pile of documents I've gotten from the Fund for UFO Research, which are on the FBI website as well as my website, I wanted to save them because I've seen some websites go dead, so I didn't want to lose that. Possibly the same thing could be done with the Australian files. I was lucky to find 10,000 files from the Australian archive. I have those on my website because I find it's important to be an archivist as well as a researcher because this stuff is for future generations.
Precisely, and I think that's what Errol had in mind too when he started his own archive. Now, here's a question for you. I had mentioned JFK before, and I'm big time into that. A lot of the files surrounding the JFK assassination are gone. They've been destroyed. Been systematically destroyed since the assassination because, for various reasons, obviously part of the cover-up and various agencies covering their own butts. So I don't think we're ever going to get a smoking gun on the JFK assassination emanating from the archives that are available to us. Do you think a lot of those archives in the UFO sense, flying saucers, all that, it's top security for sure. Do you think a lot of those have been destroyed as well, and therefore perhaps there might have been one that had a smoking gun attached to it, and it's lost forever?
Good question. I don't think that the U.S. government or British government or perhaps the South Americans, the Argentines, the Brazilians, I don't think they destroy anything. Yeah, they used to take up a lot of space, but things can be digitized and reduced down to a 64 gigabyte thumb drive.
I've heard stories where soldiers were ordered to burn UFO photos, and they'd get the butt of a gun in the face if they were to look at the photos that they were burning. They were getting rid of some of the evidence, so to speak. And I said, that's history being lost. I mean, it's like me racing the Undertaker to try to get a story off of like for instance, Todd Frazier and I were supposed to go up to Virginiatown, which is Virginiatown is not far from Kirkland Lake. We were supposed to talk to this former U.S. Air Force guy. I have his discharge papers and all that, but we wanted to talk to him about his opinions on UFO technology. He was eccentric and was kind of trying to decide for himself how UFOs functioned and all that. And his tombstone is apparently etched with a whole bunch of flying saucers on there. And we wanted to go up there to talk to him, but he passed away. Todd couldn't make it up there, and so we've lost, like, who knows how many times researchers have lost stories like that to history because of trying to race the Undertaker or evidence being thrown away or lost. I mean, even my old friend Marlene Johnson, who passed away, she had all her UFO files from before when she was married, and when they separated, she lost all those files, and who knows how many cases. She used to go and investigate UFO reports in Sudbury here, but under the guise of a man, because it wasn't proper back then in the 60s, in the late 50s or 60s, for a woman to be investigating UFO sightings with a baby in tow. She had a baby in a car seat in the back seat while she was driving around, going to the air base, to the Falcon Ridge radar base and talking to people. And she told me she's lost all her files. I wish I would have inherited some of that stuff, but it's all gone.
It makes me wonder, Errol, was it a lot of work to digitize your files and get them online?
My files, no, I don't have a lot of files online. See, I've never really, Brent, with all due respect, been a researcher. I've always considered myself to be a communications facilitator in and around the field. When I first started UFO Updates, there were only the news groups out there on the interweb, and it was nothing but flame wars, So what I did with UFO Updates was try to provide a safe haven for the writers and the researchers and the investigators and the serious publishers who are seriously interested. So every message that ever came in, and every one of those 90,000 emails that came to me that I then posted to the list, I tidied, edited. I considered myself to be more like the letters to the editor for newspapers.
Thanks. Okay.
So, yeah, that was a lot of work. My files, my archives, ain't that many of them,
No.
It's so important, the work that the two of you have done over the years. Is there one aspect in particular, I'll start with Errol again, that you can look back and say, this was something special? I guess there's many of those.
Yeah, the one that really stands out in my mind is we were having a MUFON Ontario meeting at my apartment on the 17th floor of a high-rise in uptown Toronto. And we're sitting in almost a square of couch and chairs and a large window looking north and west, and one of the attendees, Sukovias, was looking out of the window, and she said, "What's that?" Evening. This is 7 o'clock in the summer's evening, and we'll stand up and look out of the window, and where she was pointing, it was like a series of backslashes on the computer keyboard, almost very tight together. Almost like a contrail, but not. Although the reaction from a couple of the people was, "Oh, that's just a contrail." And so we all sat back down again and continued on with our meeting. And a few minutes later, Sue says, "That's not a contrail. Look at it now." And directly west of us, from the 17th floor, could see across a lot of Toronto to the Pearson International Airport approach, flight path.
Wow.
Coming into land, and there was this dark object that planes were flying past, and they have two landing paths into the airport there. And these planes were flying past this thing, must have seen what it was. And as the sun slowly set, the moon rose up and sort of traveled around this dark disc-like object, which must have been pretty damn big, until it disappeared into the twilight, and it hung there and hung there and hung there. And at the time, I only had a little dinky 8mm video camera with a 6:1 zoom lens on it, which didn't get very much, but I shot video of it off the balcony. And then I did a couple of frame grabs from it and sent them down to my buddy John Velez in New York. And graphic artist, well experienced with Photoshop and able to do. Anyway, he traced the outline.
We've got a minute left, Errol.
He traced the outline of this thing, and it was a perfect UFO with a little dome on top, and that was one of my favorite ufological moments.
That's wonderful. Now, I have to ask you another question very quickly. I want to thank Kelly Logue, by the way, folks, who puts our show together for us on the internet. Thank you, Kelly. He's up in Alaska. I've been looking at your picture all night through Skype because we don't use video, folks, and it says, "Hello, Errol. Can you tell us the story behind this little sign you're holding up?"
Oh, yeah, that's Terry Jones from Monty Python.
Show off.
Oh, a good friend of mine was the senior entertainment editor for Rogers Radio, based out of 680 News. And she interviewed everybody who came to town. and she interviewed Terry Jones when he was here plugging one of his projects. And she wrote "Hello, Errol" on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and gave it to him and said, "Hold this up while I take a picture or I'll kill you."
And obviously complied. Michel?
Yeah.
Michel, can you give us your most special moment?
I have to say it's got to be the sighting I had at the radar base again, but
Okay.
in 1990. I mean, that's the one that made me come out of the ufological closet, and
Gotcha.
it changed my life forever because it was obviously not something man-made. The way it behaved, I
There's the
tweeted,
music. I'm
I
going to have to wrap up.
okay.
Guys, there's only one solution. You got to come back.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, that's the only
Sure.
solution. www.nightfrightshow. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Brent Holland. See you all next time. Thank you, guys.
Most welcome.